Hey everyone, PV here and welcome to my new YouTube video. And today's video is going to be another gameplay video. The difference between this one and the one that I've done before is that this is going to focus on one particular turn. So this is a snapshot of a game, and the goal is to decide what the best play is in this particular situation, and also to go through the thought process behind each of the possible choices, why we choose one, why we discard another, and so on. This is a situation that was given to me during coaching. So in case you didn't know, I do personalized coaching, individual coaching. If you're interested, just DM me on Twitter at PVDDR. And one of the people that I was coaching came up to me with this scenario, and they asked, what do you think I should have done here? And I thought it was a very interesting scenario. I talked to a bunch of friends about it, I posted on Twitter about it, and today's video, I'm going to go through my thought process behind each of the choices, and also give you what ultimately would be my choice in this scenario. And this is the scenario you find yourself in. So just for those who aren't super familiar with Standard and what's going on, we're going to go through the cards that are in play in your hand very quickly. So your opponent has Giant Killer, Aggro Innkeeper, Shepherd of the Flock, and Lustrous Beast. And you have Bone Crusher Giant, I don't even know the name of this goblin, Fireblade Charger, a bunch of Snow Mountains, Faceless Haven, and your hand is Frostbite, Embercleave, the Akroan War, and Torbran Redfell. And the relevant information is that this is game 3, and so that's why you have the Akroan War in your deck. It's usually not a main deck card, you're sideboarding it, the game's 3. And also you are in the draw, so you haven't, it's your turn 4, you haven't played the land yet. So, what are the choices here? Well, the first thing to figure out is that you're not going to play a Frostbite this turn, right? Because you have 3 other 4-drops in hand. The Embercleave is effectively a 4-drop in this scenario. So if you play Frostbite now, then you're only going to play one spell for each turn for the rest of the game, right? Whereas if you play one of your 4s here, next turn you can play another 4 and a Frostbite effectively for free. So no matter how much you want to kill the Aggro Innkeeper or the Giant Killer or the Shepherd of the Flock, you're not going to cast this Frostbite. Like this should be the first play that you eliminate. So that one is out. And after that, you have 3 choices, right? You can play the Embercleave, you can play the Akroan War, or you can play the Torbran. And also there are some ramifications of how to play the turn after you play each of these cards, right? So when I talk to people, I posted a poll on Twitter that said, which of these plays would you make? And the first option that I gave was, I would attack with both creatures and play the Embercleave. And to me, I think this is actually the worst of all options. But to analyze this option, we need to figure out what's going to happen when you attack, right? To be able to play the Embercleave, you have to attack with both our creatures. So if our opponent blocks our Giant, or Bone Crusher Giant, with their Lustrous Beast, obviously that's great for us, right? Because then we get to Embercleave, we kill it for free, we deal some damage, but our opponent's biggest threat is gone. And the Goblin is also, the Fireblade Charger is a card that it doesn't really matter how they block, you're still going to get a use out of it, right? So even if they block with, the Lustrous Beast and it just dies, you get to kill the Innkeeper. So that is basically a free attack. So this works out well for you. But I think that no one reasonably competent would make this block because it's very bad versus Embercleave. The block that is obvious to me is that they will block the Bone Crusher Giant with the Shepherd of the Flock, with the 3-1. I think this block is basically automatic. I expect that the opponent to make it over 90% of the time. So this is what I'm going to assume is what's going to happen, right? The opponent is going to block the Bone Crusher Giant with their Shepherd. And then they can either block or not the Fireblade Charger with the Lustrous Beast, right? Depending on whether they want to take what point of damage or just, have you kill their Innkeeper. If they do that, then what is the sequence from here? Well, then you basically be forced to play the Embercleave, targeting the Bone Crusher Giant, right? You'll kill your opponent's Shepherd of the Flock, and you'll do a bunch of damage, right? You're going to deal 9 or 10 damage, depending on whether they block the Goblin or not, because you're going to trample over the 3-1. But you kind of put all your eggs in that one basket, right? And that is something that is not going to work very well, because your opponent has that Giant Killer already in play, right? So, the fact that they already have an answer to the Embercleave itself means that your play is basically a big lava axe. That is how I say it, right? You're playing an Embercleave as, a 4 mana, deal 10 damage kind of card. And that's what you're working with, right? And that is not something that I think is good enough to win in a spot like this. I think you don't want to deal, 10 damage to your opponent at the cost of losing your turn, because your next turn is just too bad. So it's not about thinking what this turn is going to look like. It's not only about that. It's also about thinking what's going to happen the following turns. And the following turn, your opponent is just going to tap 2 mana and tap your Embercleave creature and that's going to be it, right? So I think it's possible to get more out of your Embercleave. Another thing that is relevant that makes this play worse to me is that this is the play that gives you the biggest chance of dying. Because if you attack and your opponent blocks, blocks the giant with the 3/1, and let's say takes the Fireblade Charger, you play the Embercleave, then they could reasonably untap, attack you with Lustric Beast, and double its power twice, right? So I didn't say what the opponent was playing. They were playing the Naya combo deck, which means they're playing the Goldspan Dragon with the Unleashed Fury and Kazul's Fury, so Naya Fury, Naya Combo, Naya Punch, whatever you want to call it. And so they have a bunch of possible combinations that they can play that will kill you with that Lustric Beast, right? And I purposely didn't mention what they were playing because I think it's a relevant skill to be able to identify what they were playing. In this particular case, we know exactly what they're playing because it's game 3. Right? But this could easily have been game 1. Maybe people played the main deck Akroan War. Maybe you don't even have that in hand. Or maybe, games 1 and 2, you just didn't see any of the relevant cards. But there are scenarios in which you don't know exactly what your opponent is playing. And in this case, you need to be able to identify what they're playing because of the lens they have in play. So all the cards that they have in play can go in many different Naya versions. So if we just look at the creatures, we don't know what they're playing exactly, right? We don't know that they have Goldspan Dragon, and we don't have the Unleashed Furies. We don't have to play around that. But they played Sejiri's Step as a land, and also Kazul's Fury as a land. So this means that they have to be playing the combo deck. So we need to pay attention to what's going on to understand what our opponents are playing. So this is an important thing that this scenario gives us, I think, is that even if I don't tell you what they're playing, you need to be able to know, right? Just from what is in play. But I'm telling you they're playing the Naya deck. Which means that the Naya Fury deck, which means that if you attack with both your creatures, which is necessary to play the Embercleave, and if you tap out to play the Embercleave, you could reasonably die. Now you could think that this is something that you have to deal with, right? If they have this combination of cards, they have it, and there's nothing that you can do. And in some situations, this is the correct approach, but I feel like in this situation, you have enough other possible plays that there's no reason to expose yourself to the risk of just dying immediately. But this is not the primary, drive towards this play for me. Even if you were at, 27 life and wouldn't die immediately, I still wouldn't think this play is the best, I think. Just because I'm really wary of putting all my eggs into this Embercleave basket, knowing my opponent already has an answer in play the very next turn. The second possible play of my poll was playing the Akroan War and stealing the Lustric Beast. Right? If you do that, you can attack with the Fireblade Charger, and then if they block, you get to kill the Innkeeper anyway, which I think is always a trade you're going to be happy with. Or you get to kill the Giant Killer if they block with the Giant, right? But chances are they won't block. So they'll just take fun damage. But this is a free attack if you want it. You're still not attacking with the Giant itself because you don't want to trade it for the 3/1, right? With the Bone Crusher Giant. So you're going to steal the 5/5, and this is a play that is appealing for a couple of reasons. First, because you're not going to die. Right? You take away their 5-power creature, so it means no matter what they have, they're not going to combo kill you. Unless they have Goldspan Dragon and 3 Unleashed Furies, in which case you're always dying to death, right? There's nothing that you can reasonably do this turn to stop from dying to death. Not reasonably, there's nothing you can do at all. So if that's what they have, you're just dead. So let's assume they don't have that, they can't kill you if you steal their 5/5. Also, you play the Akroan War on a turn where they can't cast the Sejiri Step card, the protection card, right? And they also can't play the front side of the Shepherd of the Flock, the adventure side. So these are 2 cards that they could potentially have in their hand. They certainly have them in their deck. They're both already in play. That are blowouts versus the Akroan War, right? So if they pass with open mana, playing the Akroan War becomes a lot more dangerous, right? So it is appealing to play the Akroan War this turn. The problem with the Akroan War line is that it doesn't actually accomplish that much, because when all is said and done, their 2 best creatures are still going to be in play. The Giant Killer doesn't have to attack. It can tap something on the second chapter, and then it doesn't kill itself in the third chapter because it's a 1/2. And the Lustric Beast will just be given back to them once the Akroan War goes off. So during all this time, what have you accomplished? Can you even attack? You can't really attack with the Giant this turn because they have the 3/1 that it can block with, right? So you don't want to trade a 4/3 for a 3/1 that's going to die anyway. And you will attack with the Lustric Beast the following turn, but they can just chump block it with something that would be forced to attack next turn anyway and would die anyway. So in the end, you're delaying the game, you're prolonging the game, which is fine, but you're not actually getting anywhere. You're not pressuring them with this Akroan War, and you're not killing a lot of the creatures with this Akroan War. So even though playing the Akroan War is a play that does dodge a lot of different things, right? You dodge all the things that they could have because they're tap out, they have no mana, so this is a good moment to play it. playing it here is not actually gonna develop your plan very much, right? You're gonna delay the game, and you're gonna get another turn where they don't get to do much because whatever they play will just die to the Akroan War, right? If they play Goatspan Dragon, it will just kill itself in the third chapter, so they can't do that. They basically can't play creatures the next turn because they'll all die, so you are accomplishing that. But you're still not having great attacks, and you're still not closing out the game before you have to give this Lustric Beast back to them. So the idea of the Akroan War is that either the third chapter is devastating, and it kills all their creatures, or you're killing them with what you stole before you have to give it back. And neither seems to be the case here. The Akroan War play also plays around the Great Henge, so if you steal their 5/5, then they can't play the Great Henge. This was a reason that was given by a lot of people who answered the poll as why they would steal the 5/5. Because you stop the opponent from playing the Great Henge. However, these decks don't play the Great Henge. This version of the deck does not have Great Henges. For the vast majority of the time it doesn't play it. I've never even seen a version that plays it. Is it possible your opponent has it? It is possible, but it's very likely that they don't have it. So this should not be a factor when deciding your play. And the way you know if this is true or not is just by knowing the decks that are in the field, right? So I see what my opponent is playing. They're playing the Fury combo version. Because they have this land, and this means they don't have the Great Henge. You need to know this kind of stuff if you're playing a tournament. You need to know what the decks play. So if you don't know, if you just come back and you've been playing Standard for a week, you're just focusing on your deck, but you don't understand what everyone else is doing, just go look at deck lists, right? Just look up the top 8 from the latest tournament and look through them, and then identify which one your opponent is likely playing, because it is very important that you understand that they cannot have, they can have, but they very likely don't have the Great Henge in a situation like this. So you should not be trying to play around that. This should not be a consideration for the Akroan War play. Maybe the Akroan War play is good, maybe it's the best play, but not because of the Great Henge. The Great Henge is not a factor in this calculation. Then this leaves us with an alternative play, which is to play Torbran, right? And once you play Torbran, Torbran is a card that is very hard to deal with for this deck because it has 4 toughness, so it doesn't die to Bone Crusher Giant, it doesn't die to Fire Prophecy, Scorching Dragonfire, but it's only 2 power. So it also doesn't die to Chop Down, which is the Giant Killer adventure part. So it is very likely that you're going to untap with the Torbran in play. And then next turn, you can play, Embercleave plus Frostbite or Akroan War plus Frostbite. And the reason that I think it's Torbran is a good play here is because you play Torbran and you attack with your 1/1, the Fireblade Charger, right, which is going to deal 3 damage. Now your opponent doesn't have very many good blocks, right? They could block with the Lustric Beast, and then you trade with the Lustric Beast, which is a good trade for you by all accounts. Or they could block with any of their creatures, and you're going to kill 2 of them, right? Because you're going to deal 3 damage, and then when he dies, you do another 3. So you're effectively dealing 6 damage, spread however you want. So that's the play that they're never going to make. So either they're blocked with the Lustric Beast or they take 3 damage. I think it's very likely that they take 3 damage. So they go to 17, right? And then if we count how much damage we have next turn, we actually have 17. So if we play Torbran here, and then next turn, they play something. Say they play Showdown of the Skulls, right? That is the best case scenario for you. They tap out to play something that doesn't impact the battlefield. So they play Showdown of the Skulls. What's going to happen? Next turn, you're going to attack with both your creatures, and they have to make some blocks, right? Whether they block the Fireblade Charger or not, doesn't matter, because it deals 3 damage either way, right? Either it deals 3 damage to them because they took the damage, or it dies and it deals 3 damage to them anyway. So that's 3 guaranteed damage that you have next turn. And then the Giant plus the Embercleave plus the Torbran is actually 14 damage. So you're attacking for 17 damage next turn. And you might ask, yeah, but they're just going to block, right? And it is true that they're going to block, but you have the Frostbite. The Frostbite is going to deal 5 damage, it's going to remove the blocker, and then you're just going to trample over it. So for them to not die in a scenario like this, they have to specifically block with 2 creatures. At which point, this is a play that is much worse versus nothing, right? Because you're just killing 2 creatures instead of trading. And it's also much worse against Embercleave because you're killing an extra creature for free and you wouldn't be dealing lethal damage otherwise. It's only a play that's good versus exactly Embercleave plus Frostbite. And so I don't think this is a play that they will realistically make. So if they tap out, you just kill them. And I think that is a very appealing part of playing Torbran here. The issue with this play is that much like the first play, the Embercleave play, it leaves you dead to a combination of 2 cards, right? Because you're going to attack, and then if they don't block, they just kill you next turn. Because they're going to attack with the Lustric Beast. And what are you going to do? Are you going to block with your Giant? You could, but then that's really bad if they don't have anything, right? Because now you don't get to kill them the next turn, and the whole point of playing Torbran was to kill them the following turn, to present lethal the following turn. So why did you play Torbran if you were just going to block, right? But then, if you don't block, you're dead to that combination of cards. The way to play around that is to play the Torbran and pass, but not attack with your woman, which is a play that a lot of people don't even consider, right? And I think it's a very reasonable play, because, you know, it means you don't have lethal next turn, but also they don't have any attacks, right? What are they going to do? What are they going to do? They attack with their beast, just block and trade 1 for 1. Right, you trade your 1/1 for their 5/5. It's not something that they likely want to do. So they don't have very many good plays if you just pass, but also you don't present lethal. And I think the biggest selling point of playing the Torbran is that if they do something wrong, they just die. And here I think it's important to note that they do have the Giant Killer in play, right? So they do have an answer already. They don't have to have an answer in their hand. But they don't know that you have lethal damage at this point. You need to have specifically a combination of Embercleave plus Frostbite to have lethal damage, and they might just not even be considering that. So, one argument that I heard a lot was, well, it is good to force them to tap 2 mana, right? Because in the first play, the Embercleave play, they're forced to tap 2 mana, right? Because the lethal threat is there, right? It's staring at them. But in this play, they're also forced to keep the 2 mana up. They just don't know about it. So it is just better that they don't know about it than if they do know about it. Because if they do know about it, if they have, Showdown of the Skulls, or if they have Goldspan Dragon plus another 1-mana creature, right? Another adventure, another Electric Beast or something, they're not going to do it. They're just going to use the mana to tap your creature. And you'd prefer, if that didn't happen, you'd prefer if they died. So this is not a bad thing, right? It's not a good thing to force them to use 2 mana. It's better to force them to use 2 mana without them knowing that they're being forced. Because then there's a chance that they don't, and then they just die. So I think this is an important distinction here. So, 2 potential Torbran plays, right? You can play Torbran and attack, or you can play Torbran and pass. At the time that I was given this scenario, my choice was to play the Torbran and attack with the Fireblade, because I felt like this put you in the best spot, regardless of what your opponent did. So if your opponent did something like playing a Showdown, or like playing a Goldspan Dragon and making making a token and playing another creature, then you could just kill them. Right? But if they didn't do that, if they passed with open mana, if they used the Giant Killer, you had good plays too. You had, the Akroan War for something, Frostbite for something else. Frostbite would deal 5 damage. So if they played Goldspan Dragon, you could steal the Goldspan Dragon and still Frostbite the Electric Beast. I felt like it put you in the best spot, but at the risk of just dying to this combo play, right? So this was, at the time that I was given this scenario, the choice that I made. I do understand that it is also a bad play versus Red Cap Melee, right? Red Cap Melee is a card that we don't know if they have it, but most people do have it. It is quite good versus you, and it can be a disaster if they have Red Cap Melee here. So the Torbran play is weak to Red Cap Melee, but the same way that the Embercleave play is weak to Red Cap Melee, right? If you play Embercleave and they kill your giant next turn, you're also left with nothing. So I think both plays are weak to the Red Cap Melee, and the Akroan War play is the best one versus Red Cap Melee specifically. But I didn't think that at the time it was good enough versus just, random cards your opponent could have. I felt like the other play, the Torbran play, would beat everything that wasn't a Red Cap Melee the majority of the time. But also, when I was doing the coaching with the person, I told them that even though ultimately my decision was to play the Torbran, it didn't really matter, right? Because I felt like the 2 plays, playing the Torbran or playing the Akroan War, were close enough that any of them was good. You should be happy to make any of them. And the most important thing was to avoid the Embercleave play, which I perceive to be worse than the others. So the key in this scenario is to eliminate the bad play. It's not necessarily to choose between the good plays. There's a famous quote, I think it's by John Thinko, that says, there's no good play, there's only the right play. So there are no good plays, there's only the right play. So it implies that, there's the right play and every other play is bad. And you should be focusing on trying to find the right play. I think that ideally, obviously this is true, but in a scenario like this, it's much more important to identify the bad play and to rule it out. Because the good plays are very close to each other. So the Akroan War and the Torbran play are, to me, they can be 8 and 8.5, so to speak. But I don't know which one is which, right? I think they're very close to each other. That each can be better or worse depending on the scenario that you find cards are in your opponent's hand. We don't know that. There is one that is better than the other, but I honestly don't know. I thought about it for a long time. I didn't know which one was better. I didn't know what the opponent has in hand. So they're very close to me. But I do think the Embercleave play is worse. It's like a 6. right? So it is the most important thing in this scenario is the big picture thought that you should have is the Embercleave play is bad. And then anything else that you do is fine because there's no way to know which one is better, right? So you're making a play that's an 8 or a play that's an 8.5. And this is not what you should be stressing over. Obviously, if you have infinite time, you're going to do all this analysis that I did and maybe come to the same conclusion that I did or come to a different one. But anyway, I think you're going to find that both plays are relatively close to each other. And as long as you rule out the Embercleave play. So the key thing in this scenario, the key thing that you have to think of if you find yourself in a match like this with many different possible scenarios, it's not necessarily to find the right play. It is to find the wrong play and immediately discard that and then choose one of the good plays. So in this regard, I disagree with Tenkyo. I think there are good plays and there are bad plays. And it is useful to rule out the bad plays. It's more important to rule out the bad plays than to find which of the good plays is the perfect one. So I would be happy ruling out the Embercleave play here and making any of the other ones. However, there is a twist to this video. There's a secret option that I did not include in the poll that I think is actually the right answer to this question. As I told you, I got this question during coaching, right? And I talked to a bunch of friends after that. And one of them mentioned a play that I hadn't considered. And once they did, I thought more about it and thought that this was actually the best play, right? And the reason I didn't put it on the poll was because it's such an unconventional thing that I wanted to see if people would actually think about it if they weren't prompted, right? Because the moment you put a weird play as a choice, people will automatically start thinking about it, right? But the hard part about this play isn't to identify that it is the best play once you know that it's a possibility. It is to understand that it's a possibility to begin with. And that is playing the Akroan War and stealing the Giant Killer, not the Lustrous Piece. And this is an answer that some people wrote in, right? I did the poll with 4 options, and some people actually replied and said, actually, I would steal the Giant Killer. I think 3 people replied that, 2 or 3, right? And I think, after thinking about it, that is just the correct play. Because if you think about it, this play solves all the reservations that I had with the other play, right? I thought the Akroan War play had a lot of benefits to it, right? The benefits were that it dodged the protection spell, it dodged the Shepherd of the Flock adventure side, and it didn't, you couldn't die immediately, right? To an attack and 2 pump spells the way that you could with the other lines. So I think these were the upsides of the Akroan War play. The downsides was that because that Giant Killer was in play, you weren't actually accomplishing that much. Right? It's possible that you could just play the Akroan War and a turn cycle could pass, and you would end up in a spot that was not necessarily much better than the one you were before, right? But this play just solves all of it, because if you steal the Giant Killer, then your opponent is going to attack the Lustrous Beast, you're going to chump it, right? And you might take some damage over the course of the next turn, but you will ultimately just kill all of their creatures. Everything that is in play will die to the 3rd chapter of the Akroan War. The Giant Killer will have died as well, right? They won't be able to kill you because you have blockers. And if they play something like a Goldspan Dragon, that will also die to the 3rd chapter. So yeah, you're going to take some damage, but all their creatures will be dead. So I think this play is actually just the best play because it plays around the most things. You never die. If they have red cap melee, it's not a blowout. If they have, Sajiri's Step or the adventure card, the Shepherd, it's also not a blowout in a future turn. And then you just set up to a spot where you are going to untap and they will have an empty board, right? You kill other creatures with the 3rd chapter of the Akroan War. So I think this is actually the right play, and this is the reason that I even made this video to begin with, because it's a very unintuitive play, because we have ingrained in our minds that you should play the Akroan War and steal the bigger creature, right? It makes sense. It's the bigger creature, right? It's a 5/5 versus a 1/2. The reason you bring in Akroan War is not to steal a 1/2, because there are a lot of ways you can kill a 1/2, right? You have Frostbite, you have Bone Crusher Giant, you have Scorching Dragon Fairy if you want. The reason this card is even in your sideboard, and the reason you're bringing it in, is to steal 5/5s, right? Because the 5/5 is a card that you can't kill with Burn. It's very hard to kill with Burn. It's a card that you can't attack through because it blocks everything, and it's a card that just kills you. So it is very unintuitive to steal a 1/2 creature instead of a 5-card creature. But you have to understand that in this scenario, it actually accomplishes everything that you want. Because stealing the 5/5 wouldn't accomplish anything, because you're not removing blockers out of the way, right? Because you still can't attack with the Giant because they have the Shepherd. So you're not allowing yourself an attack if you get that 5/5 out of the way. And the 5/5 itself is not going to do a lot of damage. It's not going to do any damage, in fact, because they'll just chump block it with a creature that will be forced to attack the next turn anyway. Right? So the 5/5, stealing the 5/5 will not actually accomplish enough, and you just end up in a scenario where you have to give the 5/5 back to them. Whereas if you understand that stealing the Giant Killer is a possible play, then it solves all your problems. Because the Giant Killer itself is going to die by blocking, and the 5/5 is going to die by killing itself from the third chapter. So even though it's a play that it doesn't look like it should be made because it's so against what the spirit of what the card was originally trying to do in your deck, in this scenario, I think is the clear best play. So once this play was actually introduced to me as a possibility, I realized that it was actually the best. And this is ultimately why I chose this game to put in this video, why I thought it was a very interesting game. Because it shows that a lot of the time, even though the best play might be obvious once you think about it, just thinking about it, just seeing it as a possible play can be quite hard. Because I looked at this scenario for a good 10 minutes and didn't even for a moment consider that I could Akroan War the 1/2. It was only after talking to someone else that I thought, oh yeah, they're right. I can just Akroan War the 1/2. And once that possibility presented itself, it became the clear best choice. But I was so tunneled down on what my preconceived notions of what my cards are supposed to do, right, that I didn't even see it. I thought I can Akroan War the 5/5, or I can play the Torbran, or I can play the Embercleave. I didn't for a moment think that I could Akroan War something else. And I'm betting that most of you didn't either, or at least very few people said that when I talked to them, either professional players that I asked about and people who replied to the Twitter poll that I did, right? Very, very few people actually saw that this was a potential play. So I thought it was pretty cool because I think that most people would agree after seeing it as a potential play that is actually the right play. So that's what I have for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you want to support my work a little bit more and get some perks on top of that, make sure to check out my Patreon page. It's patreon.com/PVDDR. And special thank you to my biggest supporters, Geoffrey Whitehead, Jaime Gonzalez, Lawson, Matias Giardini, and Thomas Picorni. I really appreciate the support. And also, again, if you're interested in individual coaching, just message me on Twitter at PVDDR. And I'll see you next week.